Well, thanks, Tim and Grace. And Linda's already preached an excellent sermon this morning. Thank you, Linda. That was fantastic. And it was great actually being out on the streets. I was, just to underline what happened there, I was very surprised at how open people were to talking. I kind of have the assumption that, nobody wants to talk to anyone really, do they? We just want to, and I'm a bit like that when I'm on a mission outside. But last Saturday we talked to numbers of people, and they were surprisingly open, not only to standing and talking, but actually opening up a faith conversation. There was a lot for me to learn from that, and really invite you. We'll be doing this again. We'll be announcing dates. Really encourage you to consider coming along. What's holding you back? If a 14-year-old boy can do this, what's holding us back? All right. I'm going to talk to you in the next few minutes about the resurrection. You won't be surprised. It's Easter Sunday. I'm going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. You could be turning to Matthew chapter 27 on your devices, or if you want an old school actual book in your hands, if you put your hand up, I'm sure someone will come and thrust a Bible into that hand. The stewards are all talking amongst themselves at the back. Could you hand out Bibles, please? Just turn around and get their attention, and discussing very important matters, no doubt. But Bibles are available there if you would like one. And you could be turning to Matthew chapter 27 and verse 62. But before we start, and we're going to read that in just a moment or two, I just want to say a few introductory comments about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because there are those around who say what we're talking about in this narrative of Jesus' resurrection is a metaphor for just, hope overcoming despair, and, a sort of new spirit among the disciples who were so defeated that somehow God just encouraged them again. And stories of a literal resurrection are just a metaphor for that reality that we have, that no matter how bad things get, somehow hope springs eternal in the human breast, and we find a way to hope again. Now, there are many people leading churches who have that kind of belief. And I have to say, that to me is a waste of time. That's not good enough for me, because it seems to me the bleakness of the world in which we live is too serious to be comforted with a message like that. And if you read the Bible itself and the testimony of these early believers, there is no doubt that what they were talking about was a literal resurrection, that Jesus bodily walked out of the tomb and met his followers, and it turned their world upside down, as it would do, right? And I just want you to reflect on it just for a moment before we come to the text. I want to pose you a question. Do you believe that Jesus walked out of the tomb physically? Now, before you give me I'm in church, I've been a Christian for 20 years, tick, yes, that's what I believe, confession of faith. But have you grasped it? And the significance that has for you and for me, if it is true. And the honest answer is, I don't think any of us can possibly grasp it. It's far too big a reality. But I do believe it as best as a human person removed from the events can. I've thought about it a lot. And I believe that what this narrative we're about to read is reliable and true. And I'm still trying to fully grasp the implications of it. Matthew 27, verse 62. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he, that is Jesus, was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he's been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first. Take a guard, Pilate answered. Go and make the tomb as secure as you know how. So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he's risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is God's holy and powerful word. When I was a young boy, I think probably around 10, maybe slightly younger, my dad bought me a copy of The Hobbit. Who's read it or seen the film? Just put your hand up, let me get an idea. Nowhere near enough of you. It's a beautiful story, and written by J.R.R. Tolkien. And of course, I finished it, and then my dad, being ambitious for his son at quite a young age, maybe 10 or 11, took me to the library. We used to go to the library regularly and get books, and he got me The Lord of the Rings. Now, The Hobbit, from memory, is about 250 pages. Lord of the Rings is an altogether different proposition. That's like 1,000 pages, and I had a false start with it, I must admit. But I think I was probably 13 or 14 when I read The Lord of the Rings, and it birthed in me a love for this sort of literature, fantasy literature. Some of you maybe enjoy this kind of literature. And really, The Lord of the Rings is by far the most significant of the early fantasy books. And subsequent to that, it's birthed a whole genre of books. And the early examples that followed Tolkien were all quite like Tolkien. It was generally a story which had a fairly straightforward narrative structure. There was some problem in the world, and a group of people would come together to try and go on some kind of quest to solve that problem. And they would go through all sorts of positive and negative experiences, but in time, at the end of the story, there would be a resolution to that problem. And most of the early books that were written in this genre were like this. It assumed from the beginning of the story that the narrative was going somewhere positive. And I like that kind of narrative. It sort of inspires me. It makes me think I could be like one of these characters. I could be a person who makes a difference in the world and becomes, through all of my experiences, good and bad, gets to the end of the story and something good happens. All right. Now, more recently, this genre has taken a different turn. And perhaps the most famous series of books in this genre of literature is now, next slide please, The Game of Thrones. You familiar with this thing? Now, this is a very different narrative structure. The narrative structure of The Game of Thrones is that essentially the world is a chaotic place. And there are good people and bad people, and you can be good or bad, but what really matters is just the great game of power. So if you read The Game of Thrones, you're introduced right at the start of the first book to a character who seems like quite a noble character, and he's dead by the end of chapter 3. And you're constantly looking for a resolution, but there is no resolution. It's just a constant story of struggle and chaos and suffering, and some people rising to the fore for a while. There really isn't any sense that this is going anywhere, certainly no sense that this is going anywhere good. And essentially, the difference between Tolkien and George Martin, the difference between The Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, reflects something that has changed in our culture. Our culture has moved away from the assumption that history is going somewhere good, a vague kind of Christian belief which would have characterized Western culture certainly, 50 years ago and more. It's moved to a belief that there is no underlying meaning to life except what I can impose on my own little experience. In other words, nihilism. There is no underlying meaning to life. Life is just a Game of Thrones, and I've just got to work hard to make sure I'm sitting on one of them in some way, however I understand that. And the truth is, if I believed that life was really like that, if that was the underlying reality of life, it would leave me deeply depressed. In fact, those books did leave me quite depressed in truth. I don't think I'm strong enough as a person to be able to cope with a narrative that says there's no meaning to life, I've just got to do my best and try my hardest. Perhaps you can cope with that when you're in your 20s, because you feel like a Superman. But this time next week I shall be running, or rather stumbling around the London Marathon, and it'll become clear to me I'm not in my 20s anymore, probably by about this time, really. Life, in one sense, George Martin is right. Life under the sun is a terrible struggle. If you haven't gone through tragedy yet, it's coming your way. The only way to avoid it is to die young, and then other people will have to cope with that tragedy. But because of Jesus' resurrection, I believe there's a deeper truth than this. And that is that through all the ups and downs of life, there is a way to have underlying meaning and purpose, and your life to actually count for something that can last forever. Next slide, please. The story starts with a narrative about how the tomb was sealed. Now, I don't know how Matthew found out about this because he clearly wasn't in this meeting between Pilate and the Pharisees, but we do know that in the early church, quite a number of the Pharisees ultimately were converted. So he must have got it from somewhere. Let's assume he spoke to one of the Pharisees and heard about this discussion that they and the chief priests with Pilate, where they decided that just to be on the safe side, they really ought to lock and bolt this tomb so that no one could get in and pinch the body. And Pilate agrees to it. The tomb was secure. Jesus was dead and buried. And that is where this narrative starts. In a moment or two, we're going to see some very ordinary people to whom Jesus reveals himself. The only high-status people in this narrative are those who are colluding to make sure that Jesus is not only killed, but that he stays dead, and that there is no possibility of any other story emerging. And so they seal it up. And if the tomb stays that way, there is no Christianity. At heart, the very significant question to answer is this. Do you believe that the tomb stayed that way? Or do you believe it was opened and Jesus walked out of it? Well, the narrative goes on that on the Sabbath then, so the third day after Jesus died on the Friday, then there's a Saturday, and then there's a day after the Sabbath, the Saturday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary go to look at the tomb. And we know from the other stories that there was a certain amount of distress when they saw that the tomb was empty. But in Matthew's Gospel, we are told that an angel speaks to them. That's what we're told here. The angel comes down, so there's an earthquake, rolls back the tomb. The guards, it says, became like dead men. And then the angel, who is still there by the time the women arrive, says to them, don't be afraid. Seems to me quite often that angels start with don't be afraid because the whole situation is so fearfully terrifying. And And he says, I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. So they then instructed to go quickly and tell the disciples, he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you into Galilee. That's very important. There you will see him. Now I have told you. All right. Let's just reflect for a moment or two on all of that. First of all, we're told two ladies, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, are the two women involved. And I tried to do a bit of research to find out who this other Mary is. And it's confusing because there seem to me to be at least four Marys circulating around these narratives of the death of the cross and the resurrection. So I don't actually know finally which other Mary we're talking about here. There's various different theories circulated. But I suppose if Matthew had particularly wanted us to know which Mary he was talking about, probably would have made it clearer, although there is some context. Come and speak to me later and I'll introduce you to Nick Lunn, who will probably be able to discuss it with you very well. But Mary Magdalene is singled out. And I want to reflect on that for a moment, because Mary Magdalene is an important character here. Very important. The first thing we can say about Mary is that she has come from a very checkered past. She is a sinful woman. We know that from the Bible. We're all sinful people. But it singles her out as somebody who's in the category of sort of people that the religious leaders looked down on. She had led an immoral life. She's a woman, and women are discriminated against in the ancient world. So from that point of view, also, she's a bit of an outsider. We're also told, aren't we, that she was possessed by evil spirits before Jesus delivered her. She is categorically not the sort of person who would be first on your list if you were trying to start a new religious movement and trying to get credible people to advocate and front up. She is an outsider, and she is a sort of person that powerful people disdain and don't take seriously. And yet she is the first Christian evangelist. God, in his plan, chose this woman to be the one who would see the risen Christ first and then go and start spreading the good news that he was raised from the dead. This is highly significant, don't you think? Secondly, Jesus tells them to go into Galilee. He tells them to tell the disciples to go into Galilee. Actually, the angel tells them to give the disciples that message. Then when Jesus meets them, he repeats it. Galilee. Why Galilee? Well, if you look at this map for a moment, we're getting a parallel message here to what I've just said about Mary Magdalene. Jerusalem is down towards the south in this picture. Galilee's in the north, and it's sometimes referred to as Galilee of the Gentiles because, according to the scholars, in the ancient times, there were more Gentiles there, non-Jews in other words, than there were Jews. And the Jews who lived down in Judea sort of saw them a little bit as, not... They looked down on them. Because, Gentiles, for a Jew in the day, a faithful Jew, particularly a very religious Jew, a very low view of Gentiles. There's all these Gentiles hanging around there. And yet Jesus, when he wants to begin the resurrection movement, he bases it in Galilee. Surely the sensible thing, the strategic thing to do, would have been to go to recruit some high social status people and announce it in Jerusalem. But he doesn't do that. He said he recruits low social status people and sends them into Galilee, which is an area that is looked down on. And what this means, of course, is that in this story, as in we read it on almost every page of the Gospels, that Jesus is particularly keen on using low social status people. Now, there are exceptions to that, exceptions in the early church of more educated, wealthy people, not least the Apostle Paul himself. But even the Apostle Paul reflected that God delights in using the weak things of this world to shame the strong. When Mary encountered the risen Christ, Mary and the other Mary, it says they clasped his feet and they worshipped him. They'd run away from the angel afraid, yet filled with joy. Which seems to me the kind of detail that you get in these narratives that suggest they're reliable. Because I can imagine an eyewitness speaking to Matthew, because he wasn't there at this point, and saying, you know, my reaction when this happened, it was kind of weird because I felt frightened and joyful at the same time. I think that's how, that has a ring of truth to me. That is how someone would react to this. Frightened and filled with joy. And it says they worshipped him. At that moment, they realized that what they were dealing with here was not just a powerful person, a prophet, as people so often thought about Jesus. They were dealing with a human being who is God, because you worship God. This is an extraordinary thing, because Jews were absolutely rooted in the fact that you worship nobody but Yahweh, who is in heaven. But these events have finally revealed the identity of Jesus. He is God in human form. And I love Jesus' first words to them. Greetings. What do you say? What's the protocol if you are the risen divine Messiah and you are meeting the first human being to which you reveal yourself? There's no kind of etiquette playbook for that has ever been written. And so he says the word that is translated in the English, greetings. What would Jesus say to you if you met him? Well, Jesus, on one level, is quite normal. You know, some of the depictions of Jesus in art, this sort of glorious sort of person who's sort of lit up slightly more than human beings, and that's all nonsense. He is truly human, and he would speak to you using, I think, quite normal language. Greetings, he says to them, and their whole world changes. Now let's just come back from this narrative a moment and ask an important question. The question we started with. Next slide, please. Of course, it's all still begging the question, did it really happen? Some of you will be familiar with the public intellectual Jordan Peterson. He's a bit of a divisive figure, and some people love him and some people not so much. And quite apart from what you make of his views on a whole range of subjects, he's talking a lot about the Bible these days. But without going into unnecessary detail, he sort of treats the Bible as a source of narratives that have application, but he tends to dodge the question of whether these things actually really happened. He's sort of more interested in their significance. But of course the problem, the vulnerability with that approach is that someone will say, yeah, but if they didn't really happen, then any significance they might have is very questionable, right? So people constantly keep wanting to ask him, yeah, but Jordan, do you believe these things really happened? And so he was asked not long ago about whether he believed in the resurrection, and as usually tried to dodge the question of whether he believed it really happened. And then the interviewer asked him a very interesting question. He said, now come on, it is quite significant whether these things happened. And Jordan Peterson, to be fair to him, does recognise that is an important question. And this interviewer said to him, so if I'm outside the tomb with a video camera and I'm filming, and later someone looks at that film, will they see Jesus walk out of the tomb? And that is a very important question. Because if the answer is no, you can have Sundays off forever and do something else, because this is a waste of time. As Paul, the apostle himself, puts it, if Christ is not raised from the dead, you're still in your sins. We are of all people most miserable. Why? Because we're wasting our time on a Sunday when we could be doing something else. That's not the only reason. That was sort of a bit of light relief. But if the answer is yes, then this is worth giving your whole life to. It means that you are living profoundly in a Tolkien world, not a George Martin world. A world in which your life can mean something, and actually does mean something, much more important than whether or not you can sort of engineer circumstances to enjoy yourself or not. It's a critical question. Jordan Peterson said, yes, probably you would see Jesus walk out of the tomb. Now, don't take Jordan Peterson's word for it. There have been many, many other similarly intellectually capable people who have come to the belief that Jesus Christ was indeed risen from the dead, is risen from the dead. I've given a good part of my life to trying to study everything I can on it, and certainly I've come to the conclusion that the best explanation for the events of the emergence of the church and everything surrounded with it is that Jesus Christ was bodily raised from the dead. If we had a couple of hours, I'd love to, we'll maybe do that soon, right? Do a workshop where we can really go through all of the evidence that is presented. I think it's compelling, actually. But Jesus didn't choose the Jordan Petersons of this world in the end, primarily to make his case. He chose Mary Magdalene. He didn't choose the in crowd, he chose a bunch of Galileans. Why? Because God's power is better demonstrated when people admit their weakness and in weakness come to him, and he then transforms them into tigers for him. Next slide, please. John Peterson went on to say, I think probably Jesus is risen from the dead, but I don't know what that means. I think probably, to be fair to him, he was expressing the kind of overwhelming nature of believing things like this, and I accept that. But the Bible leaves us in no doubt about what it means for you and for me this morning. It means that if you come to him, he will receive you and he will take you out of a George Martin world and place you in a Tolkien world. He will put you in a better story. Not a story in which everything always goes right for you. That story is not really available. You have to delude yourself in order to do that, and that's a sad state of affairs, really. There will be sadness in your life. But every event of your life, overseen by a sovereign God who is bringing you to a good place. Now, one final word. If God chooses, particularly as we see in this narrative, the weak things of this world, broken people, what does it mean for you if you're actually trying to be one of the strong? If you're proud, if you say in your heart, I am not like other people, I'm strong. I look down upon those who need this kind of thing. I'm strong in my own strength. When I was a young man, this is what I believed. Without meaning to, I cultivated contempt for other people in my heart. I thought, only losers need this stuff. I'm strong. I'm intelligent. I'm not like other people. God had to bring me to my knees so that I would recognize the truth about myself, that I am no different to other people. And all that arrogance was just getting in the way and had to be laid aside. If you're here this morning and you're telling yourself you're superior to other people, be careful. That was a position the chief priests were in. That was a position the Pharisees were in. Repent. God takes no pleasure in the pride of fools. You are just like other people, and you will find that out. But if you're here today and you're willing to admit, I'm more like the Galileans, I'm more like Mary Magdalene, I'm a nobody. Jesus would very much like to greet you today and place you in a story which might not be an easy narrative, but it is a narrative in which there is a guarantee of a happy ending. He wants to welcome you aboard a ship of which he is the captain, and he will steer it. I'm not sure steering is the right word. I don't know much about ships. He will take it safe into harbour. And once you're on that ship, you're safe forever, no matter what storms that ship goes through. And so to the Marys and to the Galileans of this world, if you're prepared to identify with them, there is a warm welcome. But if you think you are strong this morning, this is a profound challenge to you. Jesus is not interested in your strength. And ultimately, your own strength will betray you in this world if you do not walk with him. God bless you.